This is Andy Nowicki, your right-wing English teacher, and our lesson for today is the famous Robert Frost poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. This is a poem that is well known, but I think not well understood. It is a deceptively simple poem, or seems to be simple, and that is deceptive. People tend to see this poem as vaguely life-affirming, as vaguely positive, as vaguely encouraging, Hallmark card kind of sentiment, which is also what people say about Robert Frost's other poem that is very much in this same vein, The Road Not Taken, or The Road Not Traveled, sorry. Because both of those poems, both The Road Not Taken and Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, they both concern a man in the wilderness, stopping in the wilderness, halting in the wilderness. In The Road Not Taken, he halts because he finds that there's a fork in the road, and he would like to be able to travel on both paths and see where both of them take him, but he decides ultimately to take the one that seems to be slightly more overgrown because it's the road less traveled, and but then he allows that that wasn't that much of a difference between the two. And then says later, I shall be telling this with a sigh, ages and ages hence, I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And people respond to that poem in a lot of really, frankly, it's annoying. The kind of, for me anyway, the kind of sentimentality with which this poem is read. Now, it's true that we have choices that we have to make in life, and this is a metaphor in many ways for choosing the road less traveled by over the one that's more traveled by, and that's ultimately the one making the choice to go down the road that's slightly less traveled is the one that makes all the difference. Now, that's The Road Not Taken. Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening is to me the more interesting of the two poems, and it has a depth to it and a darkness to it that I think is very, very rarely acknowledged. I haven't heard it spoken of very much anyway, and I want to call attention to what I mean. And really, the most important aspect of this theme is found in the poem's famous final stanza, but we have to get to that point first. So let's talk about the poem or the rest of the poem, everything that leads up to that final stanza. So this poem reads, "Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake." And so here's the final verse. "The woods are lovely, dark and deep." Now, I want to stop there for a minute. Okay, just pretend that the poem ends on that line. Okay, again, my little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep. Pause. Just pause for a second and pretend, if you're reading along, with your own copy of the poem, cover those final 3 lines and just pretend that this is the final line. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep. And that's it. Pretend it ends there. That's a little unsettling, isn't it? Kind of an unsettling note to leave things with, but maybe you're not quite sure why. I mean, up to this point, what we've got is a description of this traveler on horseback. Unlike in The Road Not Taken, in this poem, he's got a horse companion. He's riding a horse, and he's really, technically speaking, trespassing in his neighbor's forest, but his neighbor is way, way far away in the village, in his house, and there's this blizzard, this raging snowstorm coming down, and so even if the neighbor minded him trespassing, he's not going to see him because he's off away in his own house. So he's stopping by woods on a snowy evening, and he's there just watching it all come down. And I don't know how many, probably some of you know more what it means to stand in the middle of a blizzard than others of you, but for those of us who live in a part of the world where we don't get a lot of snow, where it's kind of a rarity, there's something about seeing snow, not just snow, but tons and tons of snow coating everything, that is an enchanting sight. And by enchanting, I mean it casts an enchantment, it casts a spell. So again, the woods are lovely, dark, and deep. What do you think is going through his mind right now? He's got his horse there, wondering what's going on. He's giving his harness bells a shake, saying, well, what are we doing? Why are we stopping here? I'm cold. I mean, a horse only has horse sense. He doesn't know anything about the poetic beauty of watching the snow coat this forest. He's just cold. He wants to get back to his nice warm stable. But our speaker is just sitting there astride his horse in the midst of it all. And the woods are lovely, dark and deep. And then we have the final 3 lines. So you can take your hand away if you were covering them up. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. The repetition of those final 2 lines, of course, are it's a very famous couplet, if you call it a couplet. I don't know what you call it when the same line is just repeated, but again, there's this enchantment that is cast within those words. And once we read those words, once you complete that final stanza, you know what's really going on in this speaker's mind. What's going on in his mind is a death wish. He, for a moment, was pausing there, thinking of how beautiful these woods are, thinking of how beautiful it is to sit here as the snow comes down. And wouldn't this be a beautiful place to die? But then he rouses himself. And it's in the context of those final 3 lines that we know that this is indeed a reference to a death wish. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep. So he can't stay. He can't stay and die here in this beautiful snowstorm in the midst of nature. He has to move on. He's got more of his life to live. And he's got miles to go before he sleeps. And miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Much more that has to be done until that consummation devoutly to be wished, as Hamlet puts it, can finally be indulged. He's got to keep plodding on. Promises to keep, miles to go before he sleeps.